Get lost in the acoustic brilliance of 3D audio that surrounds you. Feel the embrace of the massage seats that adapt to your every move. Experience the warmth of a vehicle that welcomes you as you approach. We could tell you what makes a Lincoln SUV so extraordinary, but don't take our word for it. Take it on a test drive at the Lincoln Summer Invitation with exclusive offers on now, only at your local Lincoln retailer.
This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet. Now from the Sunbury Motors Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Half hour being brought to you by our good friends at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. Imports, domestics, microbrews, the best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drinks, lots and lots of snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and hot every day. 6 great flavors of slushies. Ready-to-drink cocktails, High Noon, Jack Daniel's Crown Royal, and the Pickle Bar led by my two favorites, the Barrels and the Dills, indeed second to none, all at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. And always a pleasure to be joined by Greg Pickel on 3.com and Blue White Illustrated. Welcome back, Greg. Great to have you with us.
Hey, Steve. Good to be with you as always. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing very well. What were a couple of the key takes for you out of Pat Kraft's press conference yesterday?
Yeah, it was good to hear from Pat. That was the first time we got a chance to talk to him since Penn State obviously took down the press box in early January to start this process that's led now to 10 days before Penn State, Nevada. The temporary seats are up, both the west side one, which you can see from outside the building, and, of course, the new ones they added in the north and southeast corners of Beaver Stadium. So, I mean, yeah, there were a couple things that were obviously big takeaways from Kraft's press conference. The first, I'm not sure it surprises anyone, but the project at this point is on time and on budget, which was always the expectation, but that is one thing he covered while he was chatting with reporters on Wednesday. So we know that at this point. He coined it as being in the second quarter of this multi-year renovation, with the first obviously being the process of both what they did during the 2024 season and then knocking the press box down and getting rolling in 2025. Those West Side temp seats are safe if there was any concern about that. No issues with those. They've been tested, inspected. Third parties, the company in production that have put them up, so nothing for fans to worry about there. And then I think the other thing was, I think a lot of people wondered what exactly the plan would be to keep the progress going during the season while also obviously hosting a home football season. And they're going to work Sunday to Thursday on home game weeks, and obviously it would be, you can assume that they would work around the clock, 7 days a week at least, during away game week. So plenty of work still to be done, plenty of work already done, but if there was any concern anyone listening or otherwise had about this place being ready for the 2025 season, those were put to rest yesterday.
Yeah, and I think the capacity is going to be about 300 less than what it was before. I think it's 300.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so, all right, now here's the next part. There's a lot of big picture items in college football. You know, the college football playoff, for example. Look, the Big Ten's the one floating all the ideas. Last I checked, Pat's in the Big Ten meetings. What did he say about it?
Yeah, so he obviously was asked about the reports from ESPN over the weekend that Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, has floated by people in his position across the conference this idea of a 24 or 28 team playoff with auto qualifiers. And I mean, he certainly didn't sound opposed to the idea, while also, I think, realizing saying that basically there's a long way to go before any of this stuff gets figured out. That came up later at actually the last question he answered, talking about non-conference scheduling and things like that in football. And his point then was it's impossible to say or know what the things are going to look like in 2029, 2028, whatever it may be down the road, and that just comes to the playoff. Well, obviously, you got to figure out what the playoff setup is going to be before you can really worry about whether or not your non-conference schedule is hurting you, helping you, otherwise. So, at this point, I think that he would be on board to listening to it, certainly. And obviously, if the Big Ten decides collectively it's going to push for that, you wouldn't expect him to sit on the sidelines and, be against it, even if he wasn't sure about it. That's certainly not the way the Big Ten ADs have been operating of late, and more so have been really taking the message from the top. Not so much him. Obviously, he didn't talk at Big Ten Media Day, so that this next part doesn't apply to him. But those who did in the athletic director world were very much on message with what Tony Petitti said to open that thing up out in Las Vegas throughout that 3-day period. So, yeah, it doesn't sound like he'd be opposed to it. But, again, I think it's just no matter what model we're talking about, they got to figure out the 2026 plan first. And then, obviously, whatever else comes from that, we'll see what the long-term impacts of that will be from there.
What is Pat's opinion on revenue share where Penn State is right now and also outside NIL?
Yeah, I mean, every indication was, and this goes back to him talking in February about them needing to continue pushing in that area, and there's every indication from yesterday that he feels good about where Penn State is, both from the rev share stuff with the House settlement and also just from an overall NIL perspective. Now, look, I don't think it's out of line to say that every athletic director that feels good about that would certainly like more in both areas, right? He talked later about the scholarship funding, things like that. Obviously they're raising money for the Beaver Stadium and have already raised an enormous amount. They had a record-setting fundraising year, per a news release that came out, I think, last week or at the end of July, perhaps, but sometime recently. So, yeah, everything's moving in the right direction on that front, I think, with football and obviously the other sports, and they are doing what they can with the money they have and the opportunities presented to them by the House settlement and by the revenue sharing and all of that. So it sounds so far so good. Again, I think more than anything, he said this in response to an answer about that college football playoff conversation, and should there be a selection committee, should there be a formula that drives things as they did back in the computer days with the BCS. And his response to that more than anything was just win and take it out of the selection committee's hands and everything else. So it applies to NIL too, obviously. And the more you win, the more I think fans want to be a part of that excitement, catch the fever, if you will. And the hope would be that, starting with the football team, but obviously the other fall sports this year, that I'm sure Penn State hopes that more success can lead to even more bigger and better opportunities and perhaps donations in that regard.
Yeah, the just win part. I mean, you look at last year, Penn State wasn't even in the opinion poll because they had one regular season loss. It's when you get to two where opinions start to come in, and three becomes perilous for you. So if you just win, you're fine. When you finally got out to the practice field yesterday, there were more periods for you to watch yesterday. So what did you think about what you saw?
Yeah, we saw a few more than normal, which was appreciated from James Franklin and his communication staff, of course. But, yeah, it was good to be back out there. This was the, I believe, fourth time we've been out there to see them since the media day back on August 2nd. Camp, of course, kicked off a few days before that. And, look, I mean, I think it applies to last night, but it also just applies to the last almost month in general. This is a team that knows what it needs to do. It has a lot of guys who have been through this before, and it just has a very professional vibe to it, the way they go through drills, the way that practice is structured and conducted. Obviously, you bring in Jim Knowles, and that is, he had to get used to things during spring practice and so on and so forth, and some guys, especially veteran ones, maybe weren't out there as much for spring ball as they would have been in previous years, but there's no indication when it comes to either guys who had missed time or the newness of it all for Jim Knowles. It's just a very professional operation, and so I think the biggest thing that struck me yesterday, just watching them go from individual drills to more of a fundamental focus to some live 3-on-3 kind of stuff, is that it's smooth. It's where you would expect this program to be coming into a year where it is among the preseason favorites in the betting community. It's among the top-ranked teams in the country, no matter which polls you use, media, data-driven ones or otherwise. And so I think that, yeah, it looks as you would expect it to look. And now I think more than anything, we're at a point where not just, members of the media or people like you who've been at practice often over the last however many weeks it's been during camp, it's just time to see it in game action. It's time to see it against a different color uniform and a different opponent compared to the work you see day in and day out, and the coaches, of course, see day in and day out with players from Penn State going against players from Penn State. So, yeah, everything is right where I think fans would either hope or expect it to be at this point. And, within 10 days from now, it'll be about time to just go out and put the pads on and do it.
Was there any position group you were particularly interested in yesterday?
Yeah, so it's interesting the way that practice is set up. I spent some time with the defensive line. Just really interested in that, especially the defensive tackle spot, defensive end to the same degree. But, with defensive tackle, you have Alonzo Ford coming back off an injury. You have a preseason All-American in Zane Durant. And then there's just a lot of potential, but you just aren't sure. Certainly from everything you read, gather, hear, whatever you want to call it, certainly there's some guys in that defensive tackle room, Xavier Gilliam's one of them, that are flashing in camp and are guys that Penn State feels like they can win with. That's great, and I'm sure that, will very likely end up being the case, but sometimes seeing is believing, and you want to see what those guys look like again against a different opponent before you have to welcome Oregon to town for the big game in the whiteout at the end of September. So spend some time just getting a feel for that group, 11 days at that point before Nevada. And then, the receivers, it's kind of hard to go on your show or any show, Steve, and not talk about the receivers, but at this point, I thought James Franklin kind of put it that way after, the way I would put it after the practice when he spoke with reporters, is basically that by the end of these 3 games coming up, and it's not just the receivers and it's not just the transfer receivers, but it's a number of position groups in general, but Penn State is going to have to learn everything it can about those guys, and those guys are going to have to prove what they're capable of, what kind of roles they should have for the rest of the season from there, Oregon and beyond. So it's a big 4 weeks, including the bye coming up once the preseason ends and the season starts. It's going to be interesting because there's a lot of guys, both ones who we expect to start and play a lot, and others who are fighting for being in that conversation. They're going to get a chance to prove themselves one way or the other over the first 3 weeks of the season and then the bye.
Yeah, you did bring up scheduling, and I know that was asked of Pat yesterday. Now, look, these schedules are done so far in advance that the only game that's scheduled non-conference is that he had something to do with his Penn State Temple, and that's because he was the Temple AD at the time. Did Pat discuss what his philosophy is on non-conference schedule in this era?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at before. Just that his more or less the takeaway from that conversation was just that, until you realize what the future of college football postseason is going to look like, until you get to a point, or if you get to a point where conferences are all playing the same number of conference games, which would obviously potentially change the way they all schedule non-conference opponents. It's just hard, I think, you can have a philosophy, the long and short of it is you can have a philosophy all you want at this moment in time, but it may not be either relevant or apply or the best philosophy that you think it is now. By the time everything changes and there's an agreement in place regarding what the postseason looks like, with how many teams make it, is there a conference championship game? Is there a consensus on the number of conference games every school plays, so on and so forth. So, yeah, that was the main takeaway there that, I think he's aware that Penn State fans, some anyway, would like a little bit more meat on particularly this year's home football schedule. But at the same time, it's what they have. And, again, is that what's going to always be? That was sort of the gist of the question, was it always going to be this way in a Pat Kraft world? That's why he pointed out, well, just remember, I wasn't a part of the creation of this in the first place. And obviously he works hand in hand with James Franklin now to set those moving forward. But the key takeaway to me is just that, whatever Pat Kraft's philosophy is now, it just may not matter, and it may be different in a short amount of time based on how things play out with the future of the playoff structure. So we'll see. I think overall, getting away from Pat Kraft's thought on it, I think I totally understand where a lot of Penn State fans are coming from, especially the ones that pay for season tickets and have parking and are going up there and making a day of it and committing to the time, cost, and yada, yada, yada. It relates to that. I get why they would rather have potentially somebody like a Texas come to town, or a Power 5 school. You can pick the one your favorite one that you'd rather see other than Nevada, FIU, or Villanova, and I totally get it. But at the same time, number one, that's kind of where a lot of teams are non-con scheduling-wise at this point across the country. Maybe not to this extent every year, but that's not an every-year thing for Penn State either. And also, I just don't think it's the worst thing in the world when you look at what the rigors of a 16, 17-game season are. But, again, totally understand where the fans who commit their time, money, and passion to it are coming from. But I think ultimately, if things go the way Penn State fans wanted to this year, the concerns or complaints or frustrations of this non-conference schedule will be far, far forgotten by the time Penn State would get to a point of getting back to the college football playoff semifinals or playing for a national title.
I have to ask you about the wrestling part of it. U20s have been happening, and then the scheduling part where it looks like Oklahoma is going to be a part of it, while the fans were hoping it would be Oklahoma State. Cale doesn't play that game. I mean, after all these years, do you get confused that the fans think one thing and Cale doesn't think the way they think?
No, not really, because I think it's more, what's the right way to put this? I think it's more wishful thinking, and I think most would acknowledge that the odds of that are just not very good to take place. If you really ask them, I think they realized it between what Penn State wrestles in the Big Ten portion of its schedule and what it typically does when you talk about going to something like the collegiate wrestling duels, where it gets 3 matches in a day or over 2 days, depending on how they run that event this year, and it goes to the Army Black Knight Invitational, where it gets a number of matches and kind of serves as the program's wrestle off to some degree if needed at any positions. And then you add a team at the end of the year, and always a non-conference match to close things out, more years than not, certainly recently, to tune up before the postseason. And, yeah, it's just not, at this point in time, in my mind anyway, it's just not realistic to think Oklahoma State would be on the schedule. I get the intrigue. I get the idea of why fans think it would be a good idea. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But to your point, I think it's pretty clear how Cale Sanderson and his staff of Cody Sanderson, Casey Cunningham, and Nick Lee now, and Adam Lynch, the director of ops, and Clay Stedman, the GM's there now too, how they set a schedule that they believe will put their wrestlers in the best position for the postseason to win, Big Ten, to set themselves up for the best possible seeding and chance to win nationals. And it's worked pretty well, obviously, as we've talked about a lot on this show. So, no, I wouldn't say surprised. I would say it's more wishful thinking and probably, a deeper realization that it's not likely to happen is in most of those thought processes than people realize or admit. That doesn't shock me, but it's been a good offseason for Penn State. Yeah, Oklahoma looks like it's on the schedule this year to come to Penn State, and the collegiate wrestling duels should, I would imagine, be back on the schedule, and that trip to Army I mentioned as well. Penn State's going to go to Drexel in December, too, the Friday, before the Big Ten title game, wrestle down there in the Philadelphia area, which is a new road trip this year for them. So, yeah, the schedule's starting to come together, and we'll learn bits and pieces of it here, of course, over the next couple of weeks and months prior to the season starting. But right now they're hot and heavy in the international freestyle side of things. They just sent 5 members of their team with a Team USA to the U20 World Championships. All 5 left with medals. 2 bronze for the Mirasola twins, who are, of course, redshirt freshmen. Cole's going to be in that heavyweight spot for Penn State this year. Connor is, a redshirt freshman who we'll see if he can fight his way into the lineup. And then he had 3 freshmen who hit the medal stand. Will Henkel finished silver. P.J. Duke and Marcus Blaze then both won gold, 2 Penn State freshmen along with Henkel. So, you send 5 guys, you come home with 5 medals, and Team USA overall had 5 gold medals, which was a new record for the program. Certainly a highly successful men's freestyle event for them this past week in Bulgaria, I believe it was. And, things are going well on that front. Jaden James, the 2026 commit, already won a U17 World Championship. And you still have U23s and Senior Worlds to go. So a lot more wrestling for Penn State guys to go this summer and fall before they hit the mat and try and defend their latest title this winter.
Penn State will never be able to host the NCAAs again. The arena is not big enough. But they can host the Big Tens. And if I recall correctly, I think 2020 they were supposed to, and it got wiped out. I think it was right around there they're supposed to host it. Right. But they get to host it this year. What kind of interest have you heard in that from the fans that the Big Tens are going to be here this year?
There's a lot. I've heard quite a bit, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think obviously number one, you get the chance to possibly, if you can't go to nationals or you don't want to go to nationals, whatever it may be, but you live in the State College area or somewhere close to State College, you get a chance to see Penn State possibly win a conference title, which is certainly something a lot of Penn State wrestling fans would want to do. So that's a part of it. You get to see the best wrestling conference in the country bring its top guys to the Bryce Jordan Center to compete over the course of 2 days, and you know what that tournament means as it relates to preparing and getting in shape and best position possible for nationals. So that's exciting. And then it's at the BJC, so you have a chance to be in a bigger environment, which means more tickets are available, of course. And so, yeah, Penn State fans are definitely excited about that. Curious to see exactly how the turnout is. You're going to have PAAA State Wrestling in Pennsylvania finishing the first day of Big Tens on Saturday down in Hershey at the Giant Center. Obviously, a lot of Penn State fans will travel to Cleveland this year for nationals, so does that keep some people at home for Big Tens? We'll have to wait and see. But, yeah, I think it should be a good turnout. It seems like Penn State fans are very, very excited for it, and I have no doubt they'll turn out in big numbers for that event later in the middle of next year.
Greg, always appreciate your time very much. Thanks for it. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Have a good one.
That is Greg Pickel on 3.com, Blue White Illustrated. This half hour brought to you by our good friends at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. Imports, domestics, microbrews, the best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drink, snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and out every day. 6 great flavors of slushies. Also, ready-to-drink cocktails, High Noon Jack Daniel's Crown Royal, and the Pickle Bar led by the Barrels and the Dills, indeed second to none. All at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
How much can you save with 0% financing for 60 months at Sunbury Motors Hyundai? Just listen. Save $8,987 in interest on a 2025 Hyundai Santa Fe. Save $9,780 in interest over the term on a 2025 Hyundai Palisade. And to make it even better, Sunbury Motors Hyundai has additional discounts. Get an additional $2,250 SMC discount on 2025 Hyundai Santa Fe SELs. And an additional $2,500 SMC discount on 2025 Hyundai Palisade calligraphies. Remember, all new Hyundais come with Hyundai Assurance and are backed by America's best warranty. 10 years, 100,000-mile limited powertrain warranty. Be a hero with zero. Save nearly $10,000 now with 0% financing for 60 months plus SMC discounts. Only at Sunbury Motors Hyundai in the North 4th Street Auto Plaza, Sunbury. Vehicle savings based on finance comparison between 0% and 5.99% APR for 60 months. See dealer for details.
Hi, this is Season. For over 100 years, the Purdy Insurance Agency has been protecting families and businesses of the greater Susquehanna Valley and beyond. With the experience of our trained and knowledgeable staff, you can rest assured that your needs will be evaluated and met by some of the industry's best representatives. No matter what your insurance needs are, call Purdy Insurance today at 570-286-5855. Visit our website at purdyinsurance.com or check us out on Facebook to see what we can do for you.